Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste to everyone and welcome to the next session, the 15th class on Atmabodha. Before I begin today's verse, which is the 52nd verse, I would just like to give you a note on contemplation, because the next verse is going to describe to us the nature and the state of a Jivan Mukta, of one liberated in life. How will we understand a state like this without tasting meditation? Tell me. Meditation is really something which needs to be tasted. The feel of it, the sense of liberation it gives, that has to be felt. Vital energy has to be raised to the heart and the mind calmed. Then only it is possible to even understand what these states are like. So if contemplation and meditation are not part of our life, it is really very difficult to understand the scriptures. That is why I always insist on spiritual practice. It is only through spiritual practice that you get a feel for all these things. You actually know them by experience. And spiritual practice is nothing but soaking your mind in God consciousness, so that the mind is elevated to a certain extent. There are so many processes towards this, which briefly we have discussed in some of the classes. Just keeping your mind in the heart, continuously taking the name of God, deep absorption within. And it gives you a joy which nothing in this world can compare with. So a taste for this has to be cultivated, developed, before we dive into something like Atmabodha. The inward turned mind, the mind free of impulses and compulsions. This is to be tasted, the sheer joy of it. So then we will not be asking for what is the joy of spiritual life, or you will immediately know what is to be done, what is the human life about. So this is something which I invite all of you to enter into, because this is the time to do it, especially when we have time in our hands, when relatively we are not as busy as we used to be, and there's a certain quietude around us. This is the time when you should dive in and get a taste for all this by yourself. Then when you read the scripture, when you read the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, immediately you relate. Like a spark, it will awaken divine consciousness in you. The mind has to be turned within. This entire thing is a process of which is to be done, a process of meditation. So along with these contemplative practices, please try to study this scripture along in the way we are studying it here, these classes. Otherwise, it will mean nothing but a few sparse thoughts in the mind. So, along with spiritual practice, we will proceed with Atmabodha. Today's 52nd verse is giving us the profound state of the Jivan Mukta, the one liberated in life. It says, Upadhisthopi tat dharmai alipto vyomavat munihi sarva vinmudhavat tishthet asakto vayuvat charet. Though associated with upadhis, he, that is the Jivan Mukta, the contemplative one, is undefiled by their traits like the sky, and he remains unaltered under all conditions like a dumb person. He moves about unattached like the wind. See, the signs of a man of contemplation are given here. Undefiled by the traits of the upadhis like the sky. He's untouched by his upadhis. He may be wearing a few upadhis because you are functioning in a transactional world. So he may be donning a few upadhis, but they remain completely separate from him, his sense of being. So they are hinting at the importance of being a nobody. Because only when you are a nobody, meditation becomes possible. If you are already somebody, how will you seek the self? And he moves about unattached like the wind. So a mind which is detached basically from its impulses, from its emotions, from its thought processes, will get this capacity to concentrate awareness, to unfold higher awareness. So detachment is not running away from home or from objects. It is running away from the circular thinking of our minds, from our jaded thinking, from our conditioned level of thinking, from our compulsiveness, our wrong habits. It is a detachment from all these. So once this is practiced to a certain extent, the mind starts getting progressively purified. As a result, it will unfold awareness. The state of pure awareness, which we are constantly talking of, becomes a possibility. It will happen by itself if you remove the ignorance of the mind. And then it is possible to taste the state of a Jivan Mukta. So this, which he says, he appears like a dumb person. Check and see in your own life. We are given to much talk only when the mind is not very quiet. When the mind is very quiet, silent, peaceful, steeped in devotion and knowledge, you really don't feel like talking. Ramana Maharshi used to say, the spoken word, it is the grandson of that great state. Thought is the son and the spoken word is the grandson. So a sort of a diluted version, you can say, of the state of pure being. So a man who perennially lives in that state, perpetually lives in that state, he will naturally remain silent, calm, extremely calm by nature. Interaction only when necessary. So this is beautifully illustrated in the life of one of the great disciples of Sri Shankaracharya. His name was Hastamalakacharya. I would like to discuss his life a bit before we proceed, because it will give you a perfect description of what we are discussing in this verse. This life of Hastamalakacharya, it inspired me right from my childhood, because it is something very deep and profound. It seems when Shankaracharya, who was the 8th century AD Advaitha philosopher, he established Advaitha as the most complete knowledge of the ultimate truth. So he was a philosopher saint of 8th century AD, and in his own time, after his realizations, he moved about all over India in order to establish this doctrine of Advaita, and also to fight other doctrines which were opposed to Advaita. So when he was in the course of his travels, once he came to a place in South India called Kollur. Today there's a village there called Shivalli, and that village, this incident occurred there, the incident which I'm going to describe now. So Shankaracharya was, along with his disciples, he would go begging from door to door, because that was the way in which they sustained themselves. It's called Madhukari Bhiksha. And the noble households of that village would keep their doors open from him and grant him whatever he required. In that village were stationed a number of Brahmin families, which was the upper caste in India in the past, given more to learning and study, teaching, and meditation, all this. So a whole lot of these people were living in that village, and they welcomed Shankaracharya with open arms. And as he was proceeding from home to home, suddenly one Brahmin came and fell at his feet. His name was Prabhakara. And this Prabhakara brought him a number of gifts and then said, my Lord, please bless me. They used to call him Bhagavad Pad, Shankar Bhagavad Pad. Even Acharya they used to call him. So please bless me. I have one problem in my life. Then Shankara said, what problem do you have? He said, Acharya, please see this. He is my son, this boy here. But you know, he remains completely silent and not interested in anything. He appears so beautiful, he's so handsome to look at, but he does not talk. Because he does not talk, we call him dumb. He does not hear anybody, so we call him deaf. And although I have performed his Upanayana ceremony and he's entitled to study the Vedas, he is not interested in anything. He just sits and hangs around. So what to do with this person, this boy? Please help me with this case. Now Shankara took one look at that boy and he was struck dumb himself. And then he turned to the father and said, look, this child, he bears the radiance of knowledge. He has such sparkling, intelligent eyes. How do you say he is deaf and dumb? I can't believe it. This boy is full of supreme knowledge. That is why he is silent. He does not want to get entangled in samsara. Then Shankaracharya turned towards the boy and said, my child, who are you? From where have you come? And where are you going? And this boy, who was supposed to be deaf and dumb, and somewhat like an idiot who appeared like that, he gave out 12 very profound verses on the ultimate truths of Advaitha philosophy. This stotram, these verses are called Hastamalaka Stotram. If you actually read the Hastamalaka Stotram, really it's breathtaking, the words. The most profound truths of Advaita have come out there. And this boy gave it out in such chaste Sanskrit. And at the end of the Stotram, he says, since the knowledge of Brahman is so clear to me, as a Hastamalaka, which means as a gooseberry placed on the palm of one's hand. See, if somebody places a fruit in the palm of your hand, how clear would that feel be? So also is the knowledge of Brahman to me. So why should I indulge in the ways of this world? Why should I get entangled in samsara? One whose clarity of consciousness is so supreme, he is Hastamalakacharya. The one to whom the knowledge of Brahman is like a gooseberry in the palm of his hand. So seeing this sight of this child, this boy, giving out these verses spontaneously, originally, and Shankaracharya being so touched by this, the father really understood the glory of his son. And then Shankara made it clear to him that this boy was not meant for a householder's life and he should join his fold. And he took the boy into his fold, and the boy later on became a sannyasin, and he became one of the mohans, that is the Mathadipati, what is called, of the four. Shankara established 4 main monasteries in the 4 corners of India. And this boy became the head of the Dwarka monastery when he grew up. So these are all very big Peethasthans, from where arose the Dashanami Sampradaya of sadhus. So this boy became the Mathadipati of Dwarka Math. So this is the story of Hastamalakacharya. Later on, when he lived with Shankara, that is after he started, once Shankara took him into his fold, this boy also started moving about with the disciples of Shankara, and everybody noticed that he was averse to actually everything, including the scriptures. So somebody suggested to Shankara that what is the source of his knowledge? If at all he sits in your classes, he sits only to confirm his experience and not to gain anything new. So what is the source of this perennial knowledge of Brahman in him, which is so spontaneous? And Shankara then said, I will tell you his story, the story of his birth. And it also happened that these disciples of Shankara wanted Hastamalakacharya to write a Vartika, a commentary on the Brahma Sutra Bhashya of Shankara. But Shankaracharya said, no, you leave him alone because he will not stoop down to any form of expression, either writing or speaking. He is in a very elevated state of consciousness. And then Shankara tells him the story of his birth. How did it come about? How was this child born and how did he become so great in childhood only? He attained the supreme knowledge. It so happened that many years back, Shankara gives out this story. There was a great sage, a man of realization, a great yogi sitting on the banks of the Yamuna river. And he was one day deeply absorbed in contemplation, completely oblivious of the outer world, when a group of girls came there to bathe. So these, they were Brahmin girls and they had to perform rituals and then take their bath. So one of them had a young infant in her hand. And she kept this baby boy near the sage and then performed her rituals and then took a bath. And when she came out, she was shocked to see the baby was not where she had left it. Then she looked around and turned towards the sage. The sage was absorbed in his samadhi. And then she suddenly saw bubbles in the water. She dived into the river and she pulled out her baby from there. The child had crawled into the river and had died. So this was unacceptable to the mother, and she wept so bitterly before the sage that the sage came out of his state of absorption, and he felt so bad about this incident that he left his body and entered the body of the child through the power of his yoga. So the infant came back to life. It sprang back to life, and the mother and everybody was delighted, thinking that their child had been saved by the sage. But it was the sage reborn now. You know, the Sukshma Sharir travels from one body to another. We have already discussed the Sukshma Sharir, the mind. So that mind reincarnated in this body. And so as this child grew up, it was very clear to everybody that this was no ordinary child. It was immersed in God consciousness. After a certain age, it was clear to everybody that he would not talk, he would not get involved and entangled in the world. And when he became a teenage boy, he was really considered deaf and dumb and incapable of anything because he was absorbed in his own states of mind. So Shankaracharya said, this was Hastamalakacharya. This is that sage reborn in that infant, and today this is that infant grown into this boy. That is why Hastamalakacharya's life, it is really, the life says everything. That is why these verses have come out of his mouth. You see, let me give you a glimpse of the verses which he gave out in the Hastamalaka Stotram. The very first time when this child spoke, what did he speak to Shankara? Look at, let me just give you one verse. Mukha bhasako, but I will give you the English only. The shining image of the face that you are seeing in the mirror does not have any existence apart from the face itself. So also the self reflected in the mind does not have separate existence from Brahman in its real nature. And that I am incarnated in this form and wishing to join in that, wishing to become one with that. Then he says the reflected image vanishes in the absence of the mirror, but the face exists without any reflection. So also the intellect and the mind in which the self is reflected remains over, the self remains over even without the mind and the intellect. Without the intellect, only awareness remains, and I am that who has taken this form to be united with that ultimate knowledge. Now a young boy is saying this. You see how clear the mind is. He has grasped the entire spirit of Vedanta. These two verses are enough actually to usher a really sensitive mind into that state. You see what he is saying. This very pure consciousness which we are is reflected in our mind. Just like how your face is reflected in a mirror. If you destroy the mirror, do you affect the face, the real face? You don't. So also if you destroy the mind and the intellect, destroy in the sense, put them aside. The pure consciousness that you are will remain over, will shine by itself. The face is never destroyed with the destruction of the mirror. Such a profound truth this child is giving out. And that I am, he says. And this knowledge to me is as clear as an amlaki placed in one's hand. So you see, the entire thing is like this. This boy grew up to be one of the great spiritual stalwarts of the order of Shankara. And there's a whole tradition based on Hastamalakacharya, because every insight of such a mind will be luminous. And it has transforming power because it has touched the supreme ultimate truth. So this is not a mere story. It is of deep inspirational value. Lives like this, and this has been a reality. You see, the entire Indian culture is based on such traditions. That is why it is important to understand the uniqueness of this culture, which believes in restraint, which believes in Sanyam, which believes in the power of yoga, because there have been personalities who have brought this into, have demonstrated this completely in their lives. Like this case here, Hastamalakacharya's case. So this is what is being said when Shankara says that the Jivan Mukta becomes dumb just due to the profundity of his knowledge. He finds the medium of speech to be really useless, to be very meager. If at all he speaks, it will be about some profound Vedantic truth. Because speech can be used as a means for Shravan, isn't it? That is its value. To hear about the Lord, to hear about the highest truths of life, to hear about the knowledge of Brahman. That is the purpose of speech. But what are we using it for? How do we use speech? So this is the value of speech. A mind which touches reality, its every thought and word will be extremely powerful and imbued with that. So such a mind does not make mistakes as a result. For the simple reason, it cannot make mistakes. The mind has not taken any other course. It is riveted on the truth. So you can use these word symbols or clues to go back to that original state. But always remember, the word will only remain a grandson of the state of being, pure being. Even thought is only the son, not the thing in itself. So this is the story of Hastamalakacharya, which I wanted to tell you here just to help us grasp these verses. When you have a live example, it's so much better to understand. So the next verse, 53rd verse, is further telling us the liberation of the Jivan Mukta. Upadi vilayad Vishnu nirvishesha vishe munihi jale jalam vyad vyomni tejas tejasi vayatha. On the destruction of the upadhis, he, the contemplative one, is totally absorbed in Vishnu, the all-pervading spirit, like water in water, space in space, and light in light. See, when a pot is broken, the water inside the pot, the water outside the pot, suppose you place the pot in a lake, they become one, isn't it? So also air. You break a glass of, just a glass, and the air inside the glass, the air outside become one. So also, because there are absolutely no demarcations to the awareness of a Jivan Mukta, when he gets liberation, he merges with the supreme awareness, the supreme consciousness, what we call God, Brahman. He merges in that. See, there are two views held traditionally by scriptures, what is called Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti. The state of mind is the same. The liberated one has the same state of mind, the state of complete liberation of mind. The opening into full awareness, full consciousness. See, this divine consciousness, again I tell you, it is to be practiced through meditation, nididhyasan, or some yogic technique to be known. The difference between just talking and thinking about it and experiencing it is like, now suppose I keep uttering the word consciousness. Will it mean anything? To most people it means nothing. But what consciousness is, if you can capture in meditation, any form of meditation, then when you use the word consciousness, it will mean a wholly different thing altogether. It will mean something so much more. Otherwise, it's just some kind of a thought in your mind, a cloud in your mind. That's all. Consciousness means only that much. So through spiritual practice, all these things, these are all subjective realities which are meant to be experienced. And then only we will know the state of the Jivan Mukta is the state of complete liberation itself. But one school of Vedantists hold that as long as the prarabdha, which means karma, continues for that person, that part of his karma fal which has set into motion, which is going on, as long as that exists, he will not merge into Brahman immediately, but will continue a life in that liberated state. Complete his life, and then there is Videha Mukti. After death, he plunges into the state of supreme consciousness. This is called generally what is called moksha or mukti in Hinduism. But the Jivan Mukta is not that he is limited in his liberated state. He is in the state of complete liberation. So actually speaking, there is not much difference between the two. The Jivan Mukta and the Videha Mukta. But these are concepts which have been developed over time. So the Jivan Mukta is the state to be aimed at, liberated while living, not a post-mortem liberation, but right now, here, can I liberate this mind? So all of these scriptures are telling us here only you can get that highest bliss. Here only you are going to experience the highest consciousness if you train your mind. Because this knowledge is not bound within the mind. The mind has to be set apart, either conquered or put down, but transcended to attain this knowledge. And that is why entire sadhana is about purification of mind, training of mind. Please remember, sadhana has no other purpose. Sadhana is not about how long a time I spent in meditation or what kind of physical austerity I did. Did it lead to purity of mind? Did it make my mind clear of all sanskars, all sorts of clutter in the mind? Did it clarify all of that? Do I palpably feel the presence of awareness in my mind? Has clarity stepped into everything that I do? How do I look at the people around me? This is sadhana. So you see, sadhana is never accomplished by running away somewhere. Please know this for certain, because today I have a question also on that. If you run away somewhere, please remember you take the mind with you. You can't live apart from your mind, isn't it? The mind will go with you. The same mind which you are applying to the world, through which we are studying Atmabodha, that same mind is to be dealt with in our sadhana, in our spiritual practices. That is why I always say, never leave spiritual practice. If you skip it for 4 or 5 days, you are back to square one. This is the nature of the human experience. You will keep taking in impressions which will clutter the mind. Sadhana keeps the arena clear for this kind of action, contemplation. So keep to it. See, the structure of human experiences, there is a subject and an object. If the subject does not remain self-contained, which means the mind is not turned towards the self, the object is the only thing you will engage with. This is the nature of human experience. So in order to remain complete within oneself, in order to arrive at these great truths of life, in order to understand the nature of existence, it is important to make the subject self-sufficient so that he doesn't need the object. This is the purpose of all sadhana and meditation, to make you completely independent of all this. Otherwise, I need somebody to keep me happy, some object to keep me entertained, some person to engage with. Otherwise, I am sad and morose. This is a very sorry state of affairs. Today, in the midst of this raging pandemic, we can utilize our time towards all this, towards building these states of mind within ourselves, isn't it? Take it as an opportunity. Whenever I'm asked to speak of positive thinking, especially to my students, then I always tell them about this, that for a sincere seeker, everything is an opportunity to intensify spiritual practice. And never, how do you know the states of your mind? See, good mental health basically means a completely non-complaining attitude. Please note this. Mental health is directly related with this self-knowledge. The first sign of mental health is no complaints. Everything is taken as an opportunity to grow. Secondly, no blaming anybody or anything in your life. Because you are so positive, you can't blame anybody. And the third thing is a constant feel of gladness in your mind, which arises by itself, not due to an object. These are all signs of mental health. When you are in a joyous, happy state of mind, naturally you will relate well with others. Your interpersonal relationships will be good. Your job will give you happiness because by yourself you are self-sufficient. But a sign of a sick mind is constantly complaining, blaming others, and no happiness from within. So a whole lot of objects are required to keep me engaged somehow. Otherwise, I'll go into depression. So never reduce yourself to this state. All that is required is sadhana. Every day working on your mind systematically, a training in meditation. So all these things are to be observed. We have a whole lot of workshops going here on contemplative practices and mental health. So these are the fundamental things to understand. They are connected deeply. The more we practice contemplation and real forms of sadhana, you will see the better will be your mental health. Even physical health will improve, because an overcluttered mind, it affects even the body. So all of these ideas come from the basic knowledge that self-knowledge is not it's not a choice. It's not an option. It has to be done for complete human experience. Otherwise, you will experience life in bits and pieces. To experience life fully as it has been given to us and to fulfill the purpose of human life, it is important to understand the nature of this human existence. That is why yoga. Otherwise, it is very difficult to, you will only be working at keeping the mind somehow away from its negativity, away from morose states. That's a very tragic way to live. So now we enter into the verse number 54. Why is this knowledge considered supreme, the ultimate thing to be got? Yad labhat na paro labho, yad sukhat na param sukham, yad jnanat na param jnanam, tad brahmeti avadharayet. Realize that to be Brahman, the attainment of which leaves nothing more to be attained, the blessedness of which leaves no other bliss to be desired, and the knowledge of which leaves nothing more to be known. See how beautifully it is described. In the superlative, everything is described. For the simple reason, this is the supreme knowledge. I can tell you Sri Ramakrishna's one experience, which is there in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. After the state of Samadhi, he once comes out of his state of Samadhi and he is addressing the devotees sitting around him. He says, "Look, I become intoxicated just by thinking of God. I don't even need to do anything else. I don't need to drink. I get intoxicated just if I think of Mother Kali. And just if I see the Charanamrit, that sacred water which is used in worship. So if I just, the water with which actually you perform worship, you wash the feet of the Lord as it were. That Charanamrit, just the sight of it, I get intoxicated," he says. "I feel as if I have drunk 5 bottles of liquor." Look at the state of his mind. That is why they are saying, Yad labhat na paro labho. There is no gain greater than this gain. No bliss greater than this bliss. No knowledge greater than this knowledge. The establishment of your being in Brahman, Supreme Being. This identification with the mind and its idiosyncrasies, this is no way of living. One who touches awareness, even in the slightest degree, pure awareness, understands the fallacy of living in the mind, living with a mind. Because the very source and foundation of the mind is pure awareness. If you don't touch that source, you will remain in the realm of thought, which is positive, negative. It functions in the dual realm, all thought. So this entire thing has to be transcended by the power of yoga, and this knowledge has to be arrived at. Sri Ramakrishna used to very clearly say that there are 3 types of anandas, joys in human life. The first is what he called Vishayananda, joy in the senses. So that is the lowest form of joy because it is very short term. It puts you on the hedonic treadmill, which we have already discussed, and it finally leaves you unfulfilled because no matter how much of sensory joy is there, you will still be asking what next? What more is there for me to experience? So it leaves you unfulfilled. The next level of joy is what he called Bhajanananda, the joy born of spiritual practice, a steady mind, an organized mind, has very steady, pure vrittis, thought forms which are elevating. That gives a great amount of joy. Far greater. You see, it is almost the ladder of happiness which I speak of. So Bhajanananda means the joy born of very steady, elevated states of mind. Joy born of bhajan, sadhana. So this is longer lasting, more ennobling and fulfilling, and less erratic, very stable. But finally he says is Brahmananda, the supreme joy of pure awareness. There is no comparison of anything with this. Na alpe sukham asti bhumaiva sukham. Chandogya Upanishad says there is no joy in the small, in the little. Only the vast there is joy. In Brahman. Brahman itself comes from the dhatu, which means vast. The big, Brihatvad Brahma. So in that expansive state of complete consciousness, which is very clear, the clearest state of existence, the sanest and noblest state of being, that is Brahmananda. Plunging into which one doesn't want to come back. So this is the state of all these Mahapurushas who have realized that state. Sri Ramakrishna used to struggle to come out of Samadhi. And people used to try all sorts of things to keep his mind down, not so that he doesn't plunge into Samadhi. He used to say, bring me a glass of water or give me a piece of jalebi or something like that, just to keep his mind on this plane, the normal plane of consciousness. Otherwise, its tendency was to plunge into that. So you see, that is why you found Hastamalakacharya also dumb. How can anyone leave that state? So these are all glimpses into the highest realization possible in the human experience. Even the Bhagavad Gita speaks of this. Yam labdhva chaparam labham manyate nahikam tataha yasmin sthito na dukkhena gurunapi vichalyate. See, this is very significant. The meaning of this shloka in the Bhagavad Gita is, gaining which there is nothing more left to be gained, nothing more you consider more precious to be gained, and knowing which no more sorrow touches you. Sorrow is gone forever, because the more awareness, see, the nature of awareness is, it fills the mind or fills your entire being, as it were. And happiness is, you can say, an exponential function of your awareness. When awareness explodes into your being, happiness is perpetually there. You don't need anything to make you happy. You are overflowing with happiness. So this is what they are saying. So anything which was called sorrow in the outer world, it can't touch you. The greatest of sorrows will not touch you. This state can be attained. And this is the aim of all our discussion and spiritual practice. So this is what is being told here again and again. You see, even the next verse talks of this. Yad drishtva na param drishyam, yad bhutva na punarbhavaha, yad jnatva na param jneyam, tad brahmeti avadharayet. Realize that to be Brahman, which when seen, leaves nothing more to be seen. Having become which, one is not born again into the world of becoming, and which when known, leaves nothing else to be known. It's the ultimate knowledge. Really intuiting the nature of God. After that, you will ask for nothing more. Beyond the state of pure consciousness, it satisfies everything. There is nothing more. That is why you see even devotees who have had the vision of God. There was one devotee who actually destroyed his eyes after the vision of God, because he didn't want to see anything else. So like this, that is considered to be the supreme gain of human life. It gives so much joy that it is beyond description. The thing is this, see, as long as we are not in the proximity of an avatar, spiritual practice has to be intensified. There is no way other than this. When you are in the proximity of a very great realized soul, like an avatar or his parshad, the people who come with him, they are capable of ushering this joy into our minds spontaneously, just by their presence. Like Swami Brahmananda, whoever came into his ambit experienced a strange feeling of joy. And they didn't want to leave him. There are so many such incidents in our scriptures, isn't it? The lives of incarnations show this. The cowherd boys who would play with Krishna, they didn't want to leave his company for 1 minute. Because the attraction it's a totally different degree of attraction and a different quality of attraction. It is the attraction of God for the devotee. And it is the attraction of pure awareness, because there is nothing selfish there. So constantly these descriptions are given to us just to show us the superlative quality of this happiness, this bliss, knowing which nothing more remains to be known, gaining which nothing more remains to be gained. So in the lives of great devotees, I can give you a whole number of stories which we have here on the lives of devotees who have experienced this state. You can also experience something of this as you read the life of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna especially, where constantly you will see the master plunging into samadhi and coming out of samadhi, giving his luminous words, again plunging into that state. So the nature of that mind is coming out so well in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The lives of devotees also show this. That constant tendency to turn within comes from all these states of mind. No gain is considered greater than that. So these states, now how do we actually manage to get this? It is only through inquiry and meditation. I again insist. Through inquiry, you discriminate. You bring the whole thing into your mind completely and then plunge into an absorption of what you have inquired about. See, just now we discussed these three types of Ananda: Vishayananda, Bhajanananda, and Brahmananda. Once it is clear in your mind what is Vishayananda, what it leads to, what's the weight of this joy, what is the weight of Bhajanananda, what is the weight of this level of joy, born of spiritual practice, and Brahmananda. Comparatively, when you study it, then naturally you will intensify your spiritual practice. There's no other way. Spiritual practice means nothing but soaking the mind in God consciousness. This has to be practiced again and again. And life has to be, you see, it's not enough to make just, as I always say, changing outer things in your life, the outer thing. It is important to change the inner quality of our lives, the quality of our thought, the intensity and purity of our emotion, the direction of our will. These are the essential changes in sadhana. If these are perfected, the only way will be to turn within. The mind will naturally do that. See, in a few years' time, you will rest peacefully with your mind. You will feel bliss right within yourself. So there's no more hunting joy on the outside, on the outer front. So this is the glory of the contemplative life. I think let's stop here with the discussion of these three Anandas and let us go into the question answer session, because the questions are important. See, the first question is, if one likes to take sannyas and there is a needy person in one's own home, how can one serve both these purposes? Doesn't one need a strong will to do both? If this is the situation, then many young adults who live in India are facing this. Please help me solve this. So I'm sure a young spiritual aspirant has asked this, who is very sincere about his spiritual life and yet has obligations at home. Please remember this, that if you take to an exclusive spiritual life, sannyas, without fulfilling your obligations to your parents, your mind will never forgive you and you will not be able to proceed in spiritual life. It is only after you have provided for your parents, after you have provided for those who are dependent on you. You have used the word needy, whoever requires your help, especially those who have brought you up. Only after you have satisfied their needs, provided for them, kept something for them, then only you must think of this step. Not until then. Because you cannot proceed in spiritual life if this is not done. Sannyas is not about running away somewhere. Sannyas is about changing the nature of our mind, transforming our consciousness. It will not happen if you have karma, the weight of prarabdha, heavy upon you. If you have not fulfilled your obligations, your karma turns negative. You can't proceed in spiritual life that way. Let me also tell you this, that is why in very strict orders like ours, many times when girls and boys want to join, suppose there is some such need at home, even the organization helps, the mutt helps. I have known brahmacharinis who were the only child of their parents, and they very much wanted to join. So the mutt came forward and helped the parents to sustain themselves. Some such arrangement has to be made if you want to lead an exclusive, intensive spiritual life. But you cannot ignore them or put aside such obligations and step into this. Please be sure of that, because your mind will not allow it. So instead of regretting later, it is better to understand this right from the beginning. Many of our youngsters, even after their education, they take up a job only for this. Keep something, provide for their parents, and then after some time only they take up an exclusive spiritual life, the sannyasi's life. So don't have two thoughts about this. You must know that you must fulfill your obligations. See, duty is everything. That gives you the karmic backup for the spiritual life. If you ignore your duties and try to run away somewhere, that very same mind will follow you. So please make sure of this before you take any such step. This is a common question in India actually. Let me tell you this, that even outside our order, whenever people want to go somewhere, many times they want to go to the Himalayas, Kailas ashram somewhere and take sannyas, then also this is insisted, that have you provided for those who are dependent on you? So please take this into consideration. The second question is, what is humility? It's an important part of spiritual attainment. Is humility reverence in some form? How can one achieve humility in this complex society? It's a beautiful question. What is humility? See, for a Vedantist, humility means unself-consciousness. Humility means unself-consciousness. You are so stationed or centered in your true being, so unidentified from the body-mind complex, that there is nothing to be proud about, no matter what your achievements. That is humility. You naturally are centered in your real being. That is humility. How can you take pride in what happens to the body and mind? You are never it. You are not the body, not the mind. So what is there to be proud about? Anything that the mind and body has gathered, please see this, it has gathered through the efforts of others. So naturally you will be thankful, grateful, appreciative of the efforts of others, naturally humble. Anything that you have gathered, see today, whatever our weight is, say we are 60 kgs or 70 kgs, haven't we gathered that weight from the efforts of others? Check and see. I always tell my IIT students that when a plate of food comes in front of you, Do you know how many people have worked for it? At least 15 people have worked for this to happen. Are you thankful for that? Are you grateful? Starting from that farmer who sowed the seeds. A whole lot of people have worked so that that plate of food came in front of you. And did you say even one prayer of thanksgiving? Or were you grateful for having received that? Or no, you treated the food like, oh, I deserve it. So this is humility. Once you become unself-conscious, you will be only humble. Because humility is the truth. It is not something to be practiced. It is the truth about our existence. Anything that your mind has gathered, check and see. Your thoughts, your emotions, your will, it has all been carved by the experiences around you. Through the efforts of others, your entire psychology. So then, what is there to be proud of or boast about? What is truly only you is the self alone. The rest is all gathering from the outside. Only self and self-knowledge is you. So there you can stand on that and say, that is why you can remain humble. A man of self-knowledge is the humblest person on the planet because he knows the truth about the body and mind. Humility is truly unself-consciousness. See, Sri Ramakrishna could not ever even refer to himself as I, you know. He used to say this. For them, this body-mind complex is what we address as I. That has become something totally separate. So the question of humility, that's why Sri Ramakrishna in his daily life also appeared so humble. You know, once let me tell you this incident. In the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, there was Sri Ramakrishna's nephew called Hriday, who used to serve Sri Ramakrishna. And one day he did something which irritated the owner of that temple. And they asked him to leave the place. They asked Hriday to leave the place. Now the person who came to convey that information, something he said in a way which meant even Sri Ramakrishna should leave. And you know what immediately the master did? He put his towel on his shoulder and walked out of his room. And then the Trilokyanath, the owner, came running and fell at the master's feet and said, I didn't ask you to leave. This Hriday has committed a mistake, so I asked him to leave. So you see, their state is completely different from anything we can imagine. Once you are dissociated from the body-mind complex, all values will find their home in you. You don't have to practice them or struggle to arrive at that. You will naturally become like that because all values belong to the self, to your true being, and not to what you are donning, what you are wearing, the body-mind complex. Give things their proper place. This is what Vedanta helps us do. Seeing things in perspective, seeing things in proportion. Unless you have known this knowledge, the mind will be everything. The intellect will be everything. That's when we get proud. Isn't it? Very proud of our memory and very proud of our intelligence. And when you know the self, how can you be proud? So this is humility. And isn't it important for spiritual attainment? Of course it is. How do you practice humility? By being centered in the self. You cannot act humble. But when you know your real nature, you will be humble. You will bow down. So this is something to be, again, knowledge makes all this possible. See, remember this, it is on the foundation of knowledge that all values rest. So the cultivation of this knowledge is most important. Instead of practicing goodness and practicing humility, practice spiritual discipline for gaining the self. And all these will come by themselves. Naturally, we will know what is required. But if this essential thing is lost, if I'm not interested in knowing the truth about myself, then indeed I have to practice very hard, because you only practice what you are not. When it's an imitation of something, then you need to practice. If I touch the self, no practice anymore is required. You will just become that. So please let us remember this. Self-knowledge is the whole thing. And that is why this text you have selected is very pleasing to me, Atmabodha. We'll end today's session here with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhaga Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.